Each time we came back from the Havre, I managed to get lost in Paris, sort of a mini vacation. A couple times I had a relief driver. When I drove the Mercedes, and the time I went with Bill Blake. We had been told not to leave the Jeep unattended, but we thought we would outsmart the thieves and take the rotor out of the distributor so it couldn't run. That wasn't smart at all. As we were picking up the Jeep at the MP station, they told us that there were a million spare rotors floating around Paris, especially out the USO where we had parked it. To get gas, the military had provided gas station on the road to Paris from Germany. In Paris one time, I loaded up the tank and after looking at the map decided I would take the scenic route back to Germany, a way certainly not authorized by the Army. As I neared the border, I kept seeing German prisoners searching for mines in the fields. This began to get eerie, and I began to wonder if this was a good idea after all. At the border with Germany, the French had set up a check station and stopped me. Now what do I do? Germany had none of the course as there were no governments so soon after the war. So I bluffed my way through the checkpoint and finally made it back home. Then there was a time we were driving the Mercedes back from Paris and the GIs were saluting us. Strange, as the general was not in it. After a while, at a stop, I or my partner got out and looked at the star on the front of the bumper. The cover had come off and the soldiers were saluting, thinking the general was in it. It was just a private in the back seat. We fixed that immediately, of course. While stationed at Melsungen, I managed to acquire by barter with the Germans a German camera, which got me a start in photography. I really wanted a Leica, like everyone else, but had to settle for this old 2¼ by 3¼ film pack camera. This was actually real nice as there was nothing better than a larger negative to work with. Even the old Kodak, which didn't have much of a lens, made up for it with a large negative. I also managed to acquire a Telefunken radio, which was an upscale radio I brought home and kept for years. There is another incident of note occurred that I want to recount. When the general was away, the officer would go out with his car with their girlfriends, and so one time I gassed up the 45-gallon tank and went driving the officers for their night of fun. Coming home, however, I ran out of gas about a half mile from our quarters. I walked home and next morning took a rope and a jeep expecting to pull it home. After a couple hundred yards, the jeep was steaming, so I had to get the motor pool to bring some gas and get it home. One time the S1 officer had me taking him to his girlfriend's house and told me to wait outside. I waited and I waited and I waited and finally just got tired and drove back home. That would have been about 4 or 5 in the morning. Got back to this day. He never said anything to me about it. Years after the war, I saw him at a 3rd Division reunion, but nothing was said about this. I didn't indicate I even knew him. One thing that might have made an impression on the executive officer was the time I got a uniform of his repaired. For some reason, he was having trouble finding someone who could repair his uniform. A group of officers were discussing how to find a German who could fix it. And as his drivers, I was standing around waiting for them to get done. So he asked me to try to find it. So I went to the nearest German I could and asked where to find a seamstress who could fix his uniform. And they told me of a local town nearby. So I went back to the colonel and picked up the uniform and he asked me how I found the seamstress so fast. I told him. I asked questions. It didn't seem to occur to them for some reason. Maybe they had been fighting Germans too long. Next, we will be moved to Darmstadt to a vacant caserne for a more permanent location. It is occupied to this day, as far as I know.